The waste processing facility on Kethros Prime hummed with the low vibration of alien machinery, a sound that had become background noise to Lyra over the past 3 cycles. She moved between the sorting bins with practiced efficiency, her four-fingered hands separating organic matter from recyclable components with barely a glance. The work was simple, mindless, and perfectly suited for someone like her. Someone incomplete. Around her, other Kethrans worked in pairs and small groups, their bodies alive with cascading patterns of light. Blues and greens rippled across their neural crests in complex sequences, conversations flowing in brilliant displays that Lyra could see but never join. She watched a young male flash an amusing pattern about the morning meal, and 3 others responded with synchronized bursts of golden laughter. The exchange lasted perhaps 5 seconds, but it contained more communication than Lyra managed in entire days. She turned back to her work, her own neural crest remaining dark and lifeless. It had been that way since birth, a genetic abnormality that occurred in perhaps one of every 10,000 Kethrans. In the old days her mother had told her, such children were simply left in the forest. Modern Kethran society was more civilized now. They let the disabled live, even gave them jobs. Jobs that kept them away from everyone else. The human research station sat on the hill overlooking the processing facility, a cluster of modular buildings that gleamed white against the purple sky. Lyra had seen the humans from a distance many times. They were strange creatures, covered in fabric instead of displaying their natural skin, and they made constant noise with their mouths. Her supervisor had explained that humans were primitive in many ways, relying on sound vibrations for communication like animals did. Still, they possessed advanced technology and the Kethran government wanted to maintain good relations with them. Lyra was dumping a container of spent organic matter into the composting unit when she felt eyes on her. She looked up to find one of the humans standing at the facility's entrance, watching her. He was tall for his species, with dark skin and short black hair. He wore the blue uniform that marked him as part of the research team. Most humans visited the facility in groups, pointing at equipment and making their mouth noises at each other. This one was alone. He walked toward her, his movements careful, as if approaching a nervous animal. Lyra froze, uncertain what to do. Humans rarely spoke directly to facility workers, and never to her specifically. She glanced around for her supervisor, but the others had moved to a different section, their bodies still flickering with conversation. The human stopped a respectful distance away and made a sound. "Hello." Lyra stared at him. The word was simple, a greeting in standard human language. She had learned it from educational broadcasts, along with many other human words. During the long, lonely hours when other Kethrans socialized in their light language, Lyra had taught herself to understand the mouth noises. It gave her something to do, a way to fill the silence. "Can you understand me?" the human asked, speaking slowly and clearly. Lyra looked around again. This had to be some kind of mistake. Humans studied Kethran light communication. They built special sensors to record and analyze the patterns. Why would one of them speak to her using verbal language? "I have been watching the workers here," the human continued. "I noticed you do not communicate with light like the others. I wondered if perhaps you might understand spoken language instead." Something tight and painful squeezed in Lyra's chest. This human had noticed. In 3 cycles of working at this facility, none of her own people had truly noticed her beyond acknowledging her existence. But this alien, this outsider, had observed her closely enough to understand her difference. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Speaking was not forbidden, exactly, but it marked you as disabled just as clearly as a dark neural crest. Other Kethrans found the practice disturbing, primitive. But this human was waiting, his face showing an expression she did not quite understand. Hope perhaps. Or curiosity. "Yes," she said finally, her voice rough from disuse. "I understand you." The human's face transformed, his mouth curving upward in what she recognized as a smile. "My name is Carl Bennett. I am a xenobiologist studying your people's culture and communication methods." "I am Lyra," she replied, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "I work here in waste processing." Carl nodded, as if this information was important and worth remembering. "I have been on Kethros Prime for 2 months now, and I have learned much about light communication. But I realized I have never heard a Kethran speak aloud. Your verbal language is beautiful. May I ask why you use it instead of light patterns?" Lyra felt her throat tighten. No Kethran had ever asked her that question. They already knew the answer by looking at her dark crest, and they certainly did not consider it a topic worth discussing. "I cannot produce light patterns," she said quietly. "I was born without the ability. Speaking is my only way to communicate." She waited for Carl to make an excuse and leave. That was what her own people did when they learned of her disability. They would flash a quick pattern of polite dismissal to each other and move away, as if her condition might somehow spread through proximity. Instead, Carl stepped closer. I am sorry if this is inappropriate to ask, but does this condition have a name? Is it common among your people? It is called neural crest deficiency, Lyra explained, surprised to find herself answering. It is rare. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 are born this way. Our society is built around light communication, so those of us who cannot produce patterns are considered incomplete. Incomplete, Carl repeated, and something in his tone suggested he disagreed with the assessment. Yet you learned to speak. That required effort and determination. How many languages can you communicate in? Lyra blinked, confused by the question. I can speak Kethran verbal language, which is rarely used. I have learned 3 human languages from educational broadcasts: Standard English, Mandarin, and Spanish. I had much free time to study. Carl's eyes widened. 3 human languages? That is remarkable. Most of our research team only speaks 1 or 2. You have accomplished something most humans cannot. The words made no sense to Lyra. Humans were the advanced species here with their starships and complex technology. She was just a disabled Kethran who sorted waste. I only learned because I had no other choice, she said. Those who can communicate with light do not need to bother with verbal language. Perhaps, Carl said thoughtfully. But that means you possess a skill most Kethrans lack entirely. Have you considered that your difference might be valuable rather than limiting? Lyra had no answer for that. In all her cycles of life, no one had ever suggested her disability could be anything other than a burden. The idea felt dangerous, like hoping for something impossible. I would like to speak with you again if that would be acceptable, Carl said. I have many questions about Kethran culture, and I think your perspective would be invaluable to my research. My perspective? Lyra asked. Yes, Carl confirmed. You see your society from a unique position. That makes your insights important. Before Lyra could respond, her supervisor approached, his neural crest flashing irritated red patterns at Carl. The human held up his hands in a gesture of peace and backed away, but not before giving Lyra one last smile. As Carl walked back toward the research station, Lyra stood among the waste bins, her mind churning with unfamiliar thoughts. For the first time in her life, someone had suggested she might have value beyond her ability to perform simple tasks. And that someone was not even a member of her own species. She watched the human disappear into his research building, and something small and fragile stirred in her chest. It felt almost like hope. Carl returned to the waste processing facility the next morning, carrying a small recording device and a thermos of coffee. His colleague, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had warned him over breakfast that pursuing this line of research was unwise. The Kethran government had made it clear they preferred humans to study their mainstream culture, not focus on genetic abnormalities. But Carl could not shake the feeling that Lyra held answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. He found her in the same section as before, working alone while other Kethrans clustered together in the far corner, their bodies creating a light show of morning greetings. Lyra's head turned as he approached, and he saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, perhaps, that he had actually returned. Good morning, Lyra, he said in standard English. I hope I am not interrupting your work. The work does not require much concentration, she replied, her pronunciation nearly perfect. I can speak and sort at the same time. Carl smiled and settled himself on a nearby equipment crate, careful not to get in her way. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from yesterday. If you are willing, I would like to record our discussions for my research. Would that be acceptable? Lyra's hands paused over a sorting bin. You want to record me? For official research. Your perspective on Kethran society is unique and valuable, Carl explained. I have spent 2 months studying light communication patterns, but I have learned little about how your people think, what they value, what they fear. You can help me understand these things in ways no amount of light pattern analysis can achieve. I am not certain my perspective is typical, Lyra said carefully. I exist outside normal Kethran social structures. That is exactly what makes it valuable, Carl insisted. Sometimes the best way to understand a culture is to speak with those who observe it from the edges. Over the following days, Carl visited the facility every morning. Lyra continued her work while they talked, her hands moving through familiar motions as her mind engaged with questions she had never been asked before. She described how Kethran children learned light communication from birth, practicing simple patterns with their parents before gradually building complexity. She explained the subtle differences between formal patterns used in government and the casual flickers friends shared over meals. She detailed the unspoken rules about which colors conveyed which emotions, and how rapidly changing patterns indicated excitement or agitation. You observe very carefully, Carl noted during their fifth conversation. Do you study the light patterns even though you cannot participate? I have no choice but to watch, Lyra said. I cannot join the conversations, so I learn to understand them from the outside. I can read what others say to each other, even if they do not realize I am paying attention. That must be lonely, Carl said quietly. Lyra's hands stilled. No one had ever acknowledged that before. Yes, she admitted. It is very lonely. On the 8th day, Carl arrived to find Lyra's supervisor waiting with her. The older Catherine's neural crest pulsed with agitated orange patterns, and he addressed Carl in halting verbal language. You must stop these visits. Other workers are distracted. The human delegation has been notified of your unauthorized contact with facility personnel. Carl felt his stomach drop, but before he could respond, the supervisor had already walked away, his crest flashing dismissive patterns. Lyra stood very still, her expression unreadable. I apologize, Carl said. I did not mean to cause problems for you. You should go, Lyra replied, her voice flat. They are right. This association helps neither of us. But Carl did not go. Instead, he returned the next day and the day after that, though he now had to submit formal requests through the Catherine Cultural Liaison Office. His department head, Dr. Raymond Torres, called him into a private meeting. What are you doing, Carl? Raymond asked, his voice tight with frustration. I approved your research proposal to study Catherine light communication, not to befriend disabled workers at a waste facility. The Catherine government is not pleased, and frankly, neither am I. Lyra has provided more genuine insight into Catherine culture in 2 weeks than I gained in 2 months of recording light patterns, Carl argued. She understands things that participants in formal studies would never articulate. She is an outcast, Carl. Her perspective is not representative. Perhaps that is exactly why it matters, Carl countered. We claim to study alien cultures, but we only want to examine the parts that are comfortable and approved. Lyra shows us how Catherine society treats those who are different. That tells us something important about their values. Raymond sighed. Just be careful. You are risking your reputation for someone who cannot help your career. But Carl continued his visits, and slowly, Lyra began to open up in ways that went beyond academic observation. She told him about her childhood, how her parents had tried to teach her light communication for years before finally accepting it was impossible. She described the loneliness of school, where lessons were taught primarily through light patterns she could only partially follow. She explained how she had found the educational broadcasts about humans, and how learning verbal languages had given her a sense of purpose. I thought if I could learn to speak to aliens, perhaps I would not be completely useless, she said one morning. But there are very few opportunities for a Catherine who can only communicate verbally. Even this waste processing job was difficult to obtain. Carl pulled out his data pad and showed her something he had been researching. I want to show you something from human history. On Earth, we also struggled with how to treat people with disabilities. For a long time, we made the same mistakes your people are making. We assumed that physical or mental differences meant someone had less value. He showed her images and videos of human disability rights movements, of assistive technologies that help people participate fully in society, of laws that protected people from discrimination. Lyra watched in silence, her eyes growing wider. Your people changed their thinking? She asked. They decided that disabled individuals deserved equal treatment? It took a long time and much struggle, Carl admitted. But yes, we came to understand that disability is not the same as inability. People with different bodies or minds often develop different strengths. Your mastery of multiple languages, for instance, is a direct result of your neural crest deficiency. You possess communication skills that most Catherines lack entirely. But I cannot do what they can do, Lyra protested. I cannot participate in light communication. And most of them cannot do what you do, Carl pointed out. The question is not whether you are different. The question is whether your society recognizes that different abilities can be equally valuable. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. No Catherine has ever suggested my condition could be anything other than a deficit, she finally said. You are the first person to imply I might have worth beyond my ability to perform simple labor. Then perhaps your people need to learn what humans have learned, Carl said gently. That every individual has inherent value, regardless of their abilities or limitations. and that a society that excludes people because they are different is a society that wastes potential. For the first time since they had met, Lyra smiled. It was a small, uncertain expression, but it transformed her face. "Thank you, Carl," she said softly, "for seeing me as more than my disability." "I see you as exactly what you are," Carl replied. "A brilliant, capable person who deserves better than what your society has offered you." The proposal came on a morning when purple rain fell across Kethros Prime, creating rippling patterns on the ground that reminded Carl of the light communication he had spent months studying. He found Lyra in her usual spot at the waste facility, but today he carried no recording equipment, no research notes. He had something else entirely in mind. "I need to discuss something important with you," Carl said, his voice more serious than Lyra had ever heard it. "Can we speak privately?" Lyra glanced at her supervisor, who was busy in another section, then nodded. They moved to a covered area where the rain drummed overhead, providing both shelter and privacy. Carl seemed nervous, his hands moving in small, uncertain gestures. "I have been thinking about your situation," he began. "About how your society treats you, and about the opportunities you are denied simply because of your neural crest deficiency. It is not right, Lyra. You deserve better." "We have discussed this many times," Lyra said gently. "I appreciate your concern, but there is nothing to be done. This is how Kethran society functions." "There might be something," Carl said. "I have been studying Kethran bonding customs. When two individuals form a formal bond, it creates a recognized partnership with legal and social standing. Bonded pairs are treated as a single unit in many official contexts." Lyra felt her hearts begin to beat faster. "Yes, bonding is how Kethrans form permanent partnerships. But Carl, bonding requires elaborate light ceremonies. I cannot participate in such rituals." "Traditional bonding uses light patterns," Carl agreed. "But the actual legal requirement is simply a declaration of intent witnessed by representatives of both families or communities. The light ceremony is custom, not law." "What are you suggesting?" Lyra asked, though part of her already knew and could not quite believe it. Carl took a deep breath. "I am suggesting a formal cultural bond between us. As a representative of the Human Research Delegation, my bond partner would gain certain protections and privileges. You would no longer be just a waste facility worker. You would have official status as a cultural liaison." Lyra stepped back, shock flooding through her. "You cannot be serious. Carl, do you understand what you are proposing? A bond between a human and a Kethran has never happened. A bond with a disabled Kethran would be considered either mockery or madness." "I am completely serious," Carl said firmly. "And I have thought this through carefully. Yes, it will be controversial. Yes, both our communities will object. But it is legally permissible under both human and Kethran law, and it would fundamentally change your status in society." "It would destroy your reputation," Lyra protested. "Your colleagues already disapprove of your visits to me. If you formally bond with a disabled Kethran, the human delegation will see you as unstable. The Kethran government will see it as an insult. You will sacrifice everything you have worked for." "I will sacrifice nothing that truly matters," Carl countered. "My work will continue regardless. But more importantly, this is about doing what is right. You have spent your entire life being told you have no value. I refuse to accept that. This bond would prove to both our societies that you deserve recognition and respect." Lyra felt moisture gathering in her eyes, a physiological response to strong emotion. "Why would you do this for me? We have known each other for less than a month." "Because I have seen how brilliant you are," Carl said simply. "Because I have watched you master multiple languages while working a mindless job that wastes your potential. Because every conversation we have had has shown me a mind that is sharp, curious, and deeply insightful. And because I have learned that the measure of a civilization is not its technology or its power, but how it treats those who are different." "The humans will think you have lost your mind," Lyra whispered. "Some will," Carl admitted. "But humans have a long history of standing up for those who are marginalized, even when it is unpopular. This is who we are supposed to be, Lyra. This is what our values mean in practice, not just in theory." Lyra turned away, her mind spinning. The offer was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Official status. Recognition. A place in society beyond the waste facility. But the cost to Carl would be enormous, and she could not ask him to pay it. "I cannot accept," she said finally. "I will not let you ruin your life for my sake." "You are not ruining my life," Carl said, moving to stand in front of her. "You would be enriching it. Lyra, I am not proposing this bond out of pity or as some kind of political statement. I genuinely value our connection. You have become important to me and I believe we can do meaningful work together. Please at least consider it. For 3 days Lyra wrestled with the decision. She barely slept, her mind churning through possibilities and consequences. Carl visited each day but did not pressure her, simply continuing their usual conversations while waiting for her answer. On the 4th day she finally spoke the words that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Yes. I accept your proposal. The announcement created exactly the chaos Carl had predicted. Dr. Raymond Torres called an emergency meeting with the entire human research delegation, his face red with anger. This is completely unacceptable, he shouted. You are making a mockery of our mission here. The Kethran government has already filed a formal complaint. The bonding is legal under both our laws and theirs, Carl replied calmly. They may disapprove but they cannot forbid it. You will be sent back to Earth, Raymond threatened. Your career in xenobiology will be over. Then it will be over, Carl said. But I will not abandon Lyra simply because it is inconvenient for the delegation's political goals. The Kethran response was even more severe. Government officials arrived at the waste facility and removed Lyra from her position, though they could not legally prevent the bonding. Her former supervisor's neural crest blazed with outraged crimson patterns as he ordered her to leave the premises. Other Kethrans who witnessed her departure flashed patterns of disgust and confusion. Through it all, Carl remained steady. He helped Lyra move her few possessions to temporary quarters near the Human Research Station. He filed the necessary legal documentation with both governments. And he began planning a bonding ceremony that would honor both their traditions while acknowledging Lyra's unique situation. The ceremony took place 1 week later in a small room at the research station. No elaborate light displays filled the space. No traditional Kethran families witnessed the event. Instead, Carl and Lyra stood facing each other while a Kethran legal official and a human diplomatic representative observed with obvious discomfort. I, Carl Bennett, choose to bond with Lyra, Carl said clearly in both standard English and Kethran verbal language. I recognize her as my partner in all official and personal capacities. I pledge to support, respect, and stand beside her. Lyra's voice shook slightly as she responded. I, Lyra, choose to bond with Carl Bennett. I recognize him as my partner in all official and personal capacities. I pledge to support, respect, and stand beside him. The legal official reluctantly recorded the ceremony in the official records. The human representative looked like he wished to be anywhere else. But the bond was complete, legal, and binding. As they left the ceremony room, Lyra felt the weight of 1,000 judgmental stares, even though they were alone. But she also felt something else. For the first time in her life she belonged somewhere. She had a partner who chose her not despite her disability, but because he saw value in who she truly was. Carl took her hand in a very human gesture of affection. Ready to face whatever comes next? He asked. Lyra squeezed his hand in return. Yes, she said. Together. The first week after the bonding ceremony was the hardest. Lyra moved through the Human Research Station like a ghost, aware that every person she passed was talking about her. Human researchers whispered when she entered rooms, their conversations stopping abruptly. The few Kethrans who still worked with the delegation refused to acknowledge her existence, their neural crests deliberately dark in her presence. Carl seemed unbothered by the tension, but Lyra could see the strain in his face during evening meals. His colleagues no longer sat with him in the cafeteria. His research proposals were being delayed in review. Dr. Raymond Torres had made it clear that Carl's contract would not be renewed when it expired in 6 months. I have destroyed your career, Lyra said one night as they sat in Carl's small quarters. Everything they warned you would happen has happened. My career is not destroyed, Carl replied, though his smile was tired. It is simply taking a different direction than I planned. And I have an idea that might help both of us. The next morning, Carl submitted a formal proposal to the research delegation. He wanted Lyra to join the team as an official translator and cultural consultant. Her mastery of multiple languages and her unique understanding of Kethran society from an outsider's perspective would be invaluable for cross-cultural communication. Dr. Raymond Torres rejected the proposal within an hour. Absolutely not, he said when Carl confronted him. The Kethran government barely tolerates her presence here as your bond partner. Making her an official member of the delegation would be seen as a deliberate provocation. Or it would demonstrate that we value competence over politics, Carl argued. Lyra speaks 3 human languages fluently and understands Kethran culture in ways none of us ever will. We are wasting her abilities. The answer is no, Raymond said firmly. Drop this, Carl, before you make things worse for everyone. But circumstances changed 2 weeks later when a crisis erupted that threatened the entire human presence on Kethros Prime. A resource-sharing agreement that had taken months to negotiate suddenly fell apart during what should have been a routine confirmation meeting. The Kethran negotiating team emerged from the session with their neural crests blazing angry red patterns, and within hours the Kethran government issued a statement declaring the humans had violated the terms of cultural exchange. The human delegation was baffled. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had led the negotiating team, and she swore they had followed the agreed-upon protocol exactly. The translation software had recorded every light pattern exchange, and linguists analyzed the data for hours, finding nothing that explained the sudden breakdown. They keep insisting we showed disrespect, Sarah explained during an emergency meeting. But we cannot identify where the disrespect occurred. Every pattern we displayed was appropriate according to our cultural database. Dr. Raymond Torres looked exhausted. If we cannot resolve this within 48 hours, the Kethran government will revoke our research permits. 2 years of work will be lost, and the first human-Kethran alliance will end in failure. Carl saw his opportunity. Let Lyra examine the recordings. She can read light patterns even if she cannot produce them, and she understands cultural context that our software might miss. Lyra is not qualified, Raymond said automatically. She is more qualified than any of us, Carl insisted. She has spent her entire life observing Kethran light communication from the outside. She notices things that participants take for granted. Please, Raymond, what do we have to lose at this point? Raymond hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But this is her only chance. If she cannot find the problem, we are out of options. Lyra spent the next 6 hours reviewing every second of the recorded negotiations. Carl brought her meal she barely touched, watching her replay certain sequences over and over. Finally, as the sun set outside the windows, she looked up with understanding in her eyes. I found it, she said quietly. The problem occurs at timestamp 42 minutes and 18 seconds. Carl pulled up the recording and they watched together. Dr. Sarah Mitchell displayed a light pattern indicating agreement with a Kethran proposal regarding mineral extraction rights. The pattern was correct according to the database, a specific sequence of blue and green pulses. I do not see the error, Carl admitted. The pattern matches our records exactly. The pattern is correct, Lyra explained. But the timing is wrong. Sarah displayed it immediately after the Kethran proposal. In formal negotiations, immediate agreement is considered suspicious. It suggests you did not properly consider the proposal, which implies either disrespect or deception. The culturally appropriate response would be to show a contemplation pattern first, wait at least 30 seconds, then display agreement. Carl stared at her. Our cultural database says nothing about timing requirements. Because it is not a rule, Lyra said. It is an assumption so basic that no Kethran would think to explain it. It is like how humans expect people to pause between sentences when speaking. You would not write that rule in a textbook about English because it seems obvious. But to an outsider learning your language, it would not be obvious at all. Carl immediately brought Lyra's finding to Dr. Raymond Torres. The delegation had listened, then called in the Kethran cultural liaison. Through careful verbal questioning, they confirmed that Lyra was correct. The immediate agreement had indeed been interpreted as either mockery or an insult, suggesting the Kethran proposal was so poor it required no consideration. How did none of our experts catch this? Raymond asked in frustration. Your experts learned from databases and formal instruction, Lyra said carefully. I learned by watching real Kethrans interact in everyday situations. I noticed patterns your experts never saw because they were too busy studying the official rules to observe the unspoken customs. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Can you draft an apology on our behalf? Something that addresses the cultural misunderstanding in a way the Kethran government will accept. Lyra worked through the night, crafting a message that acknowledged the error without appearing weak, explained the misunderstanding without making excuses, and requested an opportunity to demonstrate proper respect for Kethran customs. She wrote it in both light pattern notation and verbal language, ensuring every nuance would be correctly understood. The Kethran government accepted the apology. The resource-sharing agreement was reinstated. And suddenly, the disabled Kethran who had been working in a waste facility was the person who had saved the Human-Kethran Alliance. Dr. Sarah Mitchell sought out Lyra the next day. I need to apologize, she said sincerely. I doubted you had anything to contribute to our work. I was wrong. Your understanding of Kethran culture is deeper than any of ours. Other researchers began approaching Lyra with questions about Catherine customs and communication. They asked her to review their light pattern displays before important meetings. They requested her insights on cultural practices they had observed but not understood. Within days, Lyra had become one of the most consulted members of the delegation, despite having no official position. Even some Catherines began to change their attitudes. A young Catherine diplomat named Thera approached Lyra hesitantly one afternoon. "I must admit something difficult," Thera said in verbal language, clearly uncomfortable with the mode of communication. "I believed you were useless because of your disability. But you understood things about our culture that I, who can produce perfect light patterns, never noticed. How is this possible?" "Because I had to pay attention differently," Lyra explained. "I could not participate, so I learned to observe. Sometimes the best insights come from those who stand outside looking in." Thera's neural crest flickered with thoughtful yellow patterns, a response so automatic that Thera did not realize Lyra could not return the gesture. But for the first time it did not matter. Lyra had proven her value in ways that transcended the limitations of her biology. That evening, Carl found her standing at the window of their quarters, looking out at the Catherine city. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that maybe you were right," Lyra said softly. "Maybe I do have worth beyond my disability. Maybe I always did and I just needed someone to help me see it." Carl put his arm around her shoulders. "You helped save an interplanetary alliance today. I would say that proves the point rather definitively." Lyra leaned against him, feeling something she had never experienced before. Not just acceptance but genuine belonging. She had found her place not despite her differences but because of them. 3 months after saving the resource-sharing agreement, Lyra received an official title that would have seemed impossible just half a year earlier. The human delegation created a new position specifically for her: cultural mediator and communications specialist. Dr. Raymond Torres himself presented her with the formal appointment documents, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine respect. "I was wrong about you," Raymond said simply as he handed her the papers. "I let politics and prejudice cloud my judgment. You have proven yourself invaluable to this mission, and I apologize for not seeing that sooner." Lyra accepted the apology with grace, though part of her still marveled at the transformation. She now had an office in the research station, a modest space with windows overlooking the Catherine city. Her days were filled with reviewing communications, advising researchers on cultural matters, and helping prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had nearly destroyed the alliance. But the most unexpected development came from the Catherine side. 2 weeks after her appointment, a young Catherine male appeared at the research station's entrance. His neural crest flickered weakly, the patterns malformed and difficult to read. He asked to speak with Lyra, using halting verbal language. "My name is Joran," he said nervously. "I have a neural processing disorder. My light patterns are incomplete and often misunderstood. I heard that you work here now, that you have an important position despite your disability. I wanted to know if this was true." Lyra invited him into her office, her heart's aching for the hope and fear she saw in his face. She recognized that expression. She had worn it herself for most of her life. "It is true," she confirmed. "I work as a mediator between humans and Catherines. My disability actually helps me in this role because I learned to communicate in ways most Catherines never consider." "Could there be a place here for me?" Joran asked. "I have skills with technology. I can repair equipment and write computer code. But no Catherine employer will hire me because they say my communication deficits make me unemployable." Lyra consulted with Carl, and together they brought Joran's case to the delegation leadership. Within a week, Joran was working in the station's technical maintenance department, his skill with alien technology proving immediately valuable. Word spread quickly through Catherine disability communities, and soon other disabled Catherines began arriving at the research station, seeking opportunities their own society had denied them. A Catherine female named Sela, whose neural crest had been damaged in an accident, became an assistant in the xenobiology labs. A young male named Ven, born with mobility limitations, found work in data analysis where his physical differences were irrelevant. Each new hire demonstrated abilities that had been overlooked simply because Catherine society focused only on what they could not do. The Catherine government watched these developments with growing discomfort. The issue came to a head during a formal diplomatic reception when Ambassador Kelth, the highest-ranking Catherine official in the region, approached Lyra directly. "You are creating problems," Kelth said, his neural crest displaying diplomatic neutrality even as his words carried an edge. "Disabled Catherines are abandoning their assigned positions to seek work with humans. This disrupts our social order. With respect, Ambassador, Lyra replied in flawless verbal language, these individuals are not abandoning anything of value. They were given positions far beneath their capabilities simply because of physical differences. The humans recognize talent that Catherine's society overlooks. You speak boldly for someone who should understand her place, Kelth said, his patterns flickering with irritation. I understand my place perfectly, Lyra responded calmly. I understand that I am capable, intelligent, and valuable. I also understand that Catherine's society wasted my potential for years because they could not see past my disability. How many others like me exist on this world, Ambassador? How much talent and ability has your government discarded because it did not fit expected patterns? The confrontation might have escalated, but Carl stepped forward, placing himself beside Lyra. Ambassador Kelth, perhaps we could discuss this productively. The human delegation would be happy to share our approaches to disability accommodation and inclusion. We have learned that diverse perspectives strengthen rather than weaken a society. Over the following weeks, a series of carefully negotiated discussions took place. The Catherine government remained reluctant to acknowledge systemic failures, but practical concerns eventually won out. Disabled Catherines working at the human station were proving highly productive, and their success was becoming impossible to ignore. Carl proposed a pilot program to introduce assistive technologies that might help disabled Catherines participate more fully in their own society. Human engineers worked with Catherine technicians to develop devices that could translate verbal language into light patterns, allowing those like Lyra to communicate in the traditional Catherine manner. They created mobility aids for those with physical limitations and sensory enhancement devices for those with processing difficulties. The first public demonstration took place in the capital city, with Lyra serving as the primary test subject. She wore a small device on her neural crest that converted her verbal speech into light patterns. When she spoke, her words were simultaneously displayed as flowing colors across her previously dark crest. The gathered crowd of Catherines watched in stunned silence as Lyra addressed them in both verbal language and light patterns simultaneously. For my entire life I was told I was incomplete, she said, her words rippling across her crest in brilliant blues and greens. I was told I could never truly participate in Catherine's society because I could not communicate as others do. But I was never incomplete. I simply needed different tools and different opportunities. She removed the device, her crest falling dark again. This technology can help those like me. But more important than any device is the understanding that disability does not equal inability. Every Catherine who has joined the Human Research Station has proven themselves capable and valuable. We were always capable. You simply needed to give us the chance to show it. The Catherine response was not immediate or universal, but it was real. The government announced a review of employment practices regarding disabled individuals. Several major Catherine corporations began pilot programs to hire disabled workers. Educational institutions started developing alternative teaching methods for students who could not fully participate in light-based instruction. The changes were slow and often met with resistance, but they were happening. And at the center of it all were Carl and Lyra, working as equal partners to bridge not just the gap between two species, but the gap between ability and opportunity. One evening, nearly a year after their bonding ceremony, they sat together in their shared quarters, reviewing proposals for expanded cultural exchange programs. Lyra paused in her reading and looked at Carl. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Bonding with me, changing the entire course of your career, enduring all the criticism and complications? Carl set down his data pad and took her hand. Not for a single moment. This past year has been the most meaningful work of my life. We are not just studying alien cultures anymore, Lyra. We are actively making both our societies better. I never imagined I could have this, Lyra said softly. A position of respect, meaningful work, the ability to create real change. I spent so long believing I had no value. You always had value, Carl said firmly. Your society simply failed to recognize it. But now they are beginning to understand what I saw from the first moment we spoke. You are brilliant, capable, and irreplaceable. Lyra smiled, a gesture she had learned from Carl and now used freely. We make a good team. The best team, Carl agreed. One disabled Catherine and one stubborn human, changing two worlds one conversation at a time. Through the windows they could see the lights of the Catherine city, where disabled individuals now worked alongside their non-disabled peers in growing numbers. The Human Research Station below bustled with activity as Catherine and human staff collaborated on projects that would have been impossible a year ago. And in offices throughout both communities, people were beginning to ask different questions about ability, value, and the assumptions they had always taken for granted. The bond between Carl and Lyra had started as a controversial decision that shocked both their peoples. It had become a catalyst for transformation that neither of them could have predicted. And as they returned to their work, planning new programs and initiatives, they knew that the Real journey was just beginning. Two worlds were learning that differences could be strengths, that disability did not define worth, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with one person choosing to see value where others saw only limitations. It was a lesson both humans and Kethrans would carry forward, thanks to an unlikely partnership that proved acceptance was not just a principle to discuss, but a practice that could transform entire civilizations.